Hi, I'm Gareth Green and welcome to another video in our series Inside the Mind of Bach, where we just take a couple of phrases of a Bach chorale and look at particular aspects of the writing. There's so much to learn about the style of Bach, but there's so much to learn about writing four-part harmony in general that these Bach chorales are often used as a model of building people's four-part writing skills. In this video, we're going to be thinking not just about, well, okay, here's a melody that Bach had to harmonise, so how did he do it? We'll cover that. But we're also going to think about a slightly deeper dimension, because any piece of music, even something as straightforward as a chorale, a hymn tune, effectively that's what this is, wants to take us on some kind of emotional journey. These chorales obviously would have been sung with words. The text would have been about something. So kind of what's the journey that you're trying to take the singer of the hymn tune or the chorale or the listener on that kind of reflects those words? How do we kind of do that musically? And one way of creating some musical tension is to include suspensions. And even though we've only got 4 bars, 4 measures of this particular chorale, there are a number of suspensions in it, and you'll hear how they create some kind of musical tension. So let me just play you these 2 phrases, and as you're listening to it, just imagine, well, where is the music slightly more tense? Where does the tension relax? So you can kind of feel that the melody is a little bit loaded with tension, isn't it? You know, we start off in G major and we just go up the triad and then we come down again. Then the melody climbs and modulates to D major. So you see how the tension is climbing through the melody. And then after that pause, which doesn't really mean pause, it just marks the end of a phrase in a Bach chorale. After that pause, you notice we go on up. So the tension continues to climb, but then it's not going to keep going up into the sky forever. So having had this note at the start of the second phrase there, the tension relaxes a little bit in the melody because it comes down and then it goes up a little bit and then it comes down. So the melody has its own inbuilt sense of increasing tension here, reducing tension there. But the harmony has a major impact on this. Okay, well, we've already said we're in the key of G major at the beginning. We have a modulation to D major for this first cadence. And then we immediately come back to G major. How do I know that? Because there's a C natural there. Where in G major, there's a little sort of hint of E minor going on there. And then we come back to G major. So the tension is already amplified by the modulation to D major as the melody climbs. And then the fact we come back home, but we have a little excursion into E minor before we come back to G major. E minor, of course, is the relative minor of G major. D major is the dominant of G major. They're closely related keys. Okay, let's start at the beginning and see if we can work our way through what's going on here. At the beginning, Bach has this, what some people would call a pickup chord or an anacrusis, anyway, a chord on the 4th beat, and it's just the tonic chord. So it's helping us establish the key, but emotionally it's fairly kind of neutral, isn't it? As he moves on to the next chord, you notice he just repeats the same chord. So we've got a tonic chord here, a tonic chord there. We've just reorganized the upper 3 parts, but it's the same chord. It's chord 1 in root position twice. Then he moves on to chord 5 in first inversion. Okay, nothing illogical about that. And then he's coming back to chord 1. So when we get here, we're back on chord 1. Now, if it just went back to chord 1, it might feel a bit stuck, mightn't it? 1, 1, 5 in first inversion, 1, and then maybe onto 5 again, then onto 1 again, which is essentially what it's doing. It's just kind of stuck going 5, 1, 5, 1. And, you know, what can you do to make that more interesting? And how do you inject a little bit of tension into it? This is where these suspensions come in. So remember, if you write a suspension, it must be prepared, then sounded, then resolved. PSR. Prepare, sound, resolve. Prepare and sound must be the same note as each other, and S going to R must move by step, nearly always downwards. So P happens on one chord, R happens on a second chord. So PSR, 3 moves, but only 2 chords. 1 chord that belongs to P, 1 chord that belongs to R. So S is the dissonant note. It's connected with the R chord, but it's dissonant with the R chord. But as I say, P is the same as S. So you have to be able to have P appearing in the previous chords so that it can be repeated as S for the next chord, so that S can move by step, preferably downwards, to become a note that belongs to the second chord. So those are the conditions of a suspension. And we describe a suspension in terms of numbers above the bass line when we're going from S to R. We don't describe P, we describe SR. So if we say something is a 4-3 suspension, it means that S to R has gone a 4th above the bass note to a 3rd above the bass note, and that doesn't describe anything that P is about. So we know that P has to be the same note as S. So once we've got S, we know what P is, but that's what the numbers mean. Let's have a look at where we've got the first of these things. Well, it's actually happening here in the alto part. Now, let's see if we can work out what's going on. This A here belongs to this chord. So this is a chord 5, a dominant chord in first inversion, and that A belongs to it. The next chord is really a chord 1, and we've got G in that alto part. But what Bach's written is this. So can you hear what's happening? This note is P, this A is S, and then it goes down by step to G, and that is R. This G belongs to this chord. This A is dissonant with the second chord, so it qualifies as P, S, R. Now, when you go from P to S, you can repeat the note or you can sustain it. If you repeat it, it tends to have a slightly stronger impact. If you sustain it, it slightly takes the edge off the impact. So notice that Bach is sustaining here. When I played it through the whole 2 phrases a moment ago, I repeated the notes just so we could begin to hear where they are. It's slightly mellowed if you sustain rather than repeat. But this is what's happening. So this is what we have to describe. The A going to the G. Now, if the A going to the G were happening over this G in the bass, we would call that a 9/8 suspension, because S going to R is a 9th above the bass going to effectively the 8th or the octave above the bass. So that's a 9/8 suspension. Now, the only thing about this situation is the bass line moves from G to B as the suspension resolves. So even though this is a 9, when it goes to G, it actually becomes 6. So technically we should describe this as a 9/6 suspension, which sounds really odd. We might understand a 9/8 because we said that we have to move from S to R by step, preferably downwards. So 9 going to 8, yeah, that's stepping downwards. 9 to 6, that doesn't sound like a step. But what's happening here is we go from a root position tonic chord to a first inversion tonic chord. Now, if the bass had just hung around on G for a crotchet or a quarter note, that would have been a 9/8 suspension. Because the bass moves from root position to first inversion, it's now gone from G to B, we have to describe that in figures as 9/6. Effectively, it's a 9/8 suspension, but it has to be labelled 9/6 because that bass line moves from root position to first inversion. So I hope that makes sense. Now, what's interesting about this suspension in the alto part, because 9/8 suspensions are very common, 7/6 suspensions are very common, 4/3 suspensions are very common. Those are the ones you're likely to meet. What's interesting about this one is it prepares here, it sounds here, it resolves here, and we've talked about that interesting thing about the bass moving, but then this note of resolution prepares us for another suspension. Oh my goodness, because that G starts there, but it's still going on here. You can see that this G is actually a quarter note or a crotchet. So it's still going on when we move to the next chord. So this G is P at that point. It's still there on the next chord. So it's S, it's just carrying on. And then it goes down by step to that F sharp, and that is R. So PSR, prepare, sound, resolve. And this time, when you see what this G is about at this point, going to this note over the bass, it's a 4/3 suspension. So we've got a 9/8 suspension, which we have to call 9/6, followed by a 4/3 suspension, where the resolution of the first suspension is also the preparation of the second suspension. So do you see how Bach increases the tension here by having not just one suspension, but two suspensions back to back? If he didn't have those suspensions, we would find it slightly boring and the emotional journey would kind of flatline. It's going 1, 1, 5 in first inversion, 1, 5, 1. It's not terribly exciting, is it? Put those two suspensions in and suddenly realise the impact on the musical interest of that, but also how it injects some tension into the phrase. It makes a real impact. Now, I was repeating those just to make them clear. Let me play them again without repeating them so you can hear they're a little bit softer. It's a little bit more subtle, isn't it? But you see what Bach is doing? He's injecting some musical tension in at this point, because we've got this 1-5-1-5 kind of obsession. There's not much else he can do about that. And he's thinking, if we have a little bit of musical interest and tension there through the suspensions, then we can let it give way to a kind of melodic increase in tension as that melodic line rises and modulates to the dominant key. So we create some harmonic tension here, and then we have the melodic tension there. So you see how this musical tension thing can happen in more than one dimension. So just to finish off what's happening at the end of this phrase, this chord here is chord 1 in G major. It's also chord 4 in D major. And then the next chord is a 7 in first inversion in D major, followed by 1. So we've got 7 here, followed by 1. Now, you might be looking at that thinking, hang on a minute, that can't be right. You can't have a cadence that goes 7-1. You can only go 5-1 or 4-1. Well, this is a 7 in first inversion, and 7 is sometimes used as a substitute for 5-7. Let me just explain that for a moment. In D major, chord 7 is C sharp, E, G, but if I put A at the bottom of that, it becomes a 5-7. So if it went 5-7-1 in D major, nobody would have a problem about that because it's a bog standard cadence. All Bach is doing here is saying, well, it kind of creates the impression of 5/7, but it isn't really 5/7 because it hasn't got that A at the bottom, but it's got the other notes of the 5/7. So it's kind of creating the impression of 5/7, even though the chord is actually 7 in first inversion. So if you're wanting to kind of get hold of the style of Bach and maybe write in the style of Bach, it's a little thing just to notice how that 7 can be a kind of substitute for 5/7. But 7, being a diminished chord, is usually better used in first inversion than in root position. Root position, it emphasizes the tritone inside the chord. Feels a bit ugly. But put it in first inversion, it slightly hides the tritone inside the chord. So that's what's going on there. So we arrive at this cadence in D. We see how we've created some tension melodically by the rising melodic line and the modulation. And we see how Bach has very cleverly put these two suspensions back to back to have some harmonic tension before the melodic tension. As I said, in the next chord at the start of the second phrase, you've immediately got a C natural. So really, this is looking like the pivot chord. It's a D major chord, it's 1 in D major, but it's also chord 5 in G major. So he goes on, and this is chord 2 in G major. He has a passing note in the bass. Then we go to the beginning of measure 3, bar 3. We have chord 5 in first inversion. A passing note that makes it 5/7 in first inversion. Bach loves to do that. But then what's he doing? Aha! Here is the next suspension. Let's have a look. And again, it's in the alto part, interestingly. Often when you're writing in 4 parts, the alto part is the most boring part. It's often just repeating lots of notes, which is good for harmonic stability, slightly boring if you're an alto singing in a choir, but hey, that's how it goes. So here, Bach is making life more interesting for the altos by putting these suspensions around the place. Now, let's see how this one works. This A in the alto here, that is P. So P is happening there. It's still sustained here, isn't it? Because you've got this dotted crotchet, dotted quarter note. So we've got P, S, and then R there. So is that working? Well, P is the same note as S. S is going to R by step, and it's going downwards. P belongs to its chord at the beginning of bar 3. R belongs to its chord on the second beat of this measure. So everything qualifies. How do we describe that suspension? A to G over G in the bass. It's another one of these 9/8. And the bass isn't moving this time, so we can genuinely call it a 9/8 suspension. So from the beginning of measure 3, this is what we've got. It's lovely, that dissonance, isn't it? And then it just melts away. Again, I've repeated it for emphasis. Let me now play it sustained. Just that little bit more subtle, isn't it? Then what's clever about the next bit is we then look at this stuff and we think, oh, he's going to write another suspension in the alto part. Have a listen to measure 3. And you think, oh, that's definitely another one, isn't it? The question is it? Or is he playing little games with us? Because we've definitely got a 9/8 suspension going on here. But then he's doing this little trick where he's moving into E minor. Quite interestingly how he does it. Because this chord is a dominant 7th in first inversion in the key of D, which is a bit interesting. But you could also say that it's some kind of 4/7 in the key of E minor. You might expect 4/7 to have a C natural in it, but it can have a C sharp in it if you're using melodic minor, and rising bass line, melodic minor could be. So we sort of think we kind of hear it as a 5/7 in D, but then it's possible to hear it as a 4/7 in E minor, which kind of makes sense because then we're going on to a 5/7 in first inversion in E minor. So, you know, this looks like a suspension. Yeah, that looks like P, that looks like S, that looks like R, but is it? Remember what we said? We've got to have 2 chords. P must belong to the first chord. Well, yes, it does. R must belong to its own chord, which it does. But actually, this G is not dissonant with this chord. And in fact, have we got 2 chords? Because we've got one chord there, we've got a second chord there, and we've got a third chord there. So you see why this is not a suspension. It almost sounds like one, it certainly looks like one, but it isn't one because we don't have that S note being dissonant with the chord. It's a note that belongs to the chord. We don't have two chords, one for P and one for R. We have three chords. So even though it might sound like a suspension, it isn't. So isn't that clever that Bach manages to kind of put two suspensions in the alto in the first phrase, then he gets another suspension in the alto in the second phrase, and then he writes something that, you know, most people might be convinced is a suspension. In fact, it isn't. So that's a kind of clever little move, isn't it? So have a listen to measure 3. Interesting, isn't it? How the suspension and the next move almost sound like the same thing, but when you think about it and hear it correctly, they're not quite. Interesting. But all of this is a move to E minor. So by the time we get to here, we've got the tonic chord of E minor. But that's chord 6 in G major, isn't it, really? So it's a kind of elaborate secondary dominant, really. And then we go on here to chord 5 in first inversion, and then he goes 1, 5, 1. So harmonically, it's all fairly straightforward, isn't it? And the tension is relaxing in the melody as we're just finishing off by coming down the scale. Anything else going on? Well, there is just this little point of interest in the tenor part. So let's have a look at this for a moment, because you can see this A in the tenor, they're being tied over the bar line and then going to G. So this A here looks like it's preparing. The A there that's still sounding is sounding, and then it's resolving onto G, isn't it? And the A here is dissonant with this chord. We've only got two chords, one chord there, one chord here, really. So it's all qualifying as a suspension. Now that looks like it's sort of going 2 to 1, doesn't it? But actually we still call it a 9/8. It's just one of those things. The reason for that is if you see 2 as a number for a suspension, it's normally telling you that the bass line is being suspended, but that's a topic for another occasion. So this one effectively is giving us a 9/8 in the tenor. So if I play from the end of bar 3, you can hear this. You hear that dissonance resolving there. So he's managed to tuck in this very closely packed suspension in the tenor. Then he repeats this little trick he did in the alto. You notice it's even the same notes, because this note is the resolution of this suspension, and it's also the preparation for the next suspension that goes P, S, R, and that is a 4/3 suspension. Then we finish off on that tonic chord. So the impact of that is really quite astonishing, isn't it? You know, if I played that without the suspensions, it could just be slightly boring. You know, if you heard that, you think, I suppose it could be a Bach Chorale, or maybe it's just Bach on a bad day, or maybe it's Fred Bach or something. As soon as we put those suspensions in, oh, it's suddenly sounding like Johann Sebastian Bach. So you can hear now how those suspensions add tension to the music and enable us to go on a much clearer journey about when the tension relaxes, when it mounts, how you can have harmonic tension in one place, melodic tension in another place, and how that really adds to the impact of a bit of 4-part harmonic writing. So whether you want to write a chorale in the style of Bach, or whether you're just trying to enhance your 4-part writing, there's a great deal to be absorbed just by examining how Bach is using those suspensions to create tensions. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, let me invite you to take a little trip to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots of things to look at there, and if you click on courses, you will find a Bach Chorale course. You'll find many other things as well which you might be interested in, with theory and harmony and all sorts of things, orchestration, you name it, we've got piles of stuff there. But if you're focused on the Bach Chorale thing, have a look at the Bach Chorale course, see if it's something you would like to study. But lots of other things to see, so do have a look, www.mmcourses.co.uk.